Thank you, Mr. President. I am much obliged to lead the debate on the second reading of this much awaited bill. Mr. President, my name is Senator Abba Moro, representing the very good people of the Benue South Senatorial District. Mr. President, by way of explanation, let me say that this bill is actually the brainchild of Senators Abba Moro, Id Gyang, and Senator Gabriel Towa Suswang. I am only privileged to lead the debate. Mr. President, may I therefore humbly seek your leave and the leave of my colleagues to lead the debate on this very important bill. Mr. President, sir.
You may proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The bill was read for the first time in this hallowed chamber on 19th November 2019. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the North Central Zone of Nigeria, in no particular order, comprises the following geopolitical states of the Federation, namely Kogi, Niger, Benue, Kwara, Plateau, Nasarawa, and our host, the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Over the past years, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the North Central Zone of Nigeria has been devastated and left in the bullocks by the noxious antics of terrorists, incidents of flooding and erosion, insurgency, the header-farmer clashes, poverty, high rate of illiteracy, to mention but a few. The zone is blessed with several mineral resources that can boost the economy of Nigeria if properly harnessed. However, because of the breeding mentioned above, the North Central Zone is handicapped and cannot do much in this regard. May I mention here, Mr. President, that the North Central Zone of Nigeria hosts two of West Africa's great rivers, namely the River Niger and, of course, the great River Benue, which flows into Nigeria from the Republic of Cameroon. The two rivers meet in north-central Nigeria and flow as one river onto the Atlantic Ocean. However, Mr. President, the presence of these two rivers has made flooding a perennial challenge in the region, with increasing intensity every year, leaving not just North Central Zone, but the entire Nigeria with great losses and trauma. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, according to the statistics from the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, in 2012, devastating flooding forced 2 million Nigerians from their homes, and 2,063 died in Plateau, Benue, Niger, Nasarawa, and Kogi states. In 2016, 92,000 people were displaced, and 38 died from incidents of flood in Benue, Kogi, Niger, Nasarawa states, and other parts of Nigeria. In 2017, floods affected 250,000 people in Benue, Kogi, Niger, and Plateau states, and of course, other parts of Nigeria. Annually, Mr. President, hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland are damaged in the North Central Zone of Nigeria, where the people are largely agrarian as a result of floods, and this happens, Mr. President, whenever there is a heavy precipitation upstream on the Benue and Niger rivers. On the Benue River, the main problem is the Lagdo Dam in Cameroon, which usually causes the river to swell when water is released. Mr. President, flood has caused a lot of damage to the North Central Zone. In Agatu, Benue State, farmers continue to lose their crops and farmland to flood and erosion. This is applicable to other states like Niger, Nasarawa, and Plateau states, which have suffered losses and trauma because of floods and erosion. Mr. President, His Excellency, Mr. President, abreast of this situation in 2018, pledged a relief effort of $8.2 million to victims of flood and erosion in Nigeria. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, it is no longer news that over the years, herder-farmer clashes in north-central Nigeria, especially in Benue State, have continuously made headlines. Consequently, infrastructure ranging from places of worship, roads, hospitals, schools, houses, recreational centers, etc., have been left tattered, shattered, and pierced by bullets. Women, children, especially pregnant women, and in fact the entire population is a victim of the atrocities perpetrated by suspected herders in the north-central zone of Nigeria. Even animals and the environment are not spared the chaos and conundrum imparted on the north-central zone of Nigeria by the perpetrators of these unwholesome acts. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, on February 24, 2016, rural dwellers in 45 villages of Agatu local government were awakened by sounds of gunshots and flicks of machetes as suspected militias swept into the area, unleashing an orgy of violence. The unfortunate incident left in its wake more than 500 persons dead, among whom were children and women, with more than 9,000 persons displaced from their ancestral homes. The displaced communities have been scattered, with many seeking refuge in various internally displaced camps scattered across Benue and Nasarawa states. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this bill seeks, therefore, to establish the North Central Development Commission, saddled with the responsibility of receiving and managing funds allocated by the federal government and donors, both international and local donors, for the resettlement, rehabilitation, integration, construction of roads, houses, farmlands, and business premises affected by flood, erosion, and farmer-herder clashes. Construction of large format drainage systems, drainage or dredging of rivers Benue and Niger to control flood, erosion, and other incidental matters, as well as tackling the menace of poverty, illiteracy, and other related environmental and developmental challenges in the north-central zone of Nigeria. Mr. President, there is a gradual paradigm shift in development efforts in Nigeria, and given the dynamics that are at play momentarily, there is an imperative need for all of us to support this bill for the establishment of the North Central Development Commission. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, we all know the bond and attachment a man has with his ancestral home and the psychological effects of being displaced from same. The funds allocated by the federal government and donors, local and international, will therefore be used to rehabilitate displaced persons and to indemnify them to their former economic status. In line, therefore, with Order 77.3 of the Senate Standing Order 2015 as amended, a compendium of the financial implications of the establishment of the Commission is hereby attached. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I humbly urge all of us in this hallowed chamber, aware of the challenges that face the north-central states of Nigeria, arising from the herder-farmer clashes, terrorist attacks, and of course flooding that is annual, support this bill for the establishment of the North Central Development Commission for fairness, equity, and even development of our country, Nigeria. I so submit, Mr. President.
The Deputy Chief Whip.
Like I said earlier, this is the much awaited North Central Development Commission bill, as sponsored by all the senators from the zone.
And in the chamber.
Indeed, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I believe everybody in this chamber
The co-sponsor.
is the co-sponsor,
Yes.
because they are all in the North Central.
Yes.
The North Central has continued to serve as the collection point. In every crisis in this country, the North Central has always been there with an open arm to harbor, to contain, and to accommodate all people who have left their zones to the North Central. And Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the beauty in the North Central is the fact that if you leave the North and you have to head to the South, you must pass through the North Central. The North Central transcends from Benue down to the border with Benin Republic through Niger State. And this is how important and how huge the North Central is. And if you look at the plateau, for example, you are talking about difficult terrain. If you look at Kogi State, you are also talking about some difficult terrain. But overall, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the North Central is endowed with a lot of natural, resources. The mineral resources of this country is in the North Central zone. And the people are very resourceful, very hardworking, very straightforward, and very honest. Of course, you know the normal parlance that when you want to do something so straightforward, you will say, Aishi Gwali Gwali. Yeah, distinguished senator.
This is Wali Wali.
Aishi Gwali Gwali. That is, do it straightforward. That is the beauty of this zone, Mr. President. And we are very accommodating and tolerant of all the situations we find ourselves. But because we are having members of other zones, the resources of the zone is being overstretched.
So we should go back.
And so for that reason, we want to continue to accommodate everybody, and that is why the North Central Development Commission will offer that ample opportunity and platform.
Deputy Chief Whip, you want the National Assembly relocated to another zone?
And we are very... Your being here is by natural design. God made it so.
But why not overstretching you?
No. I said the resources are overstretched. And they are overstretched simply because you have to pass through. If you look at the road, sir, for example, we know this joke that when you are passing through and you come into where there are potholes, the blind man will say, oh, we are now in Niger State. This is simply because of the bad roads. And most of the vehicles are heading towards the north or they are heading towards the south.
So overstretching you.
So what we are saying is that this will offer an opportunity because year on, we have come here to cry that the roads are terrible. And there must be some support. And I think the idea behind the Development Commission that has sprung up has to do with the reality of the country. And that is why all the 6 zones are yearning and asking for a Development Commission, so that we can have some targeted resource allocation, targeted project implementation, which will bring in development. Just like we have just finished discussing the issue of the Northeast, and then even the Southeast, and then the other day, the Amotekun, bill, or that is the North-Southwest. So, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this is a straightforward thing. And if you look at the water resources that the Senator Moro tried to express what happened, all the flooding, the key flashpoints for flooding is in the North Central zone, because that is where you have the confluence of Benue and Niger. And by the time you are seeing the flooding in Kogi, I want to bet you that those who are upstream of Kanji Dam have already finished suffering. And the same thing with those coming from, Jeba, downstream of Jeba, down up to, Lokoja. This is why it is important. And of course, by the time the Lamdo Dam is open in, the Cameroon, we also have the challenge of flooding in Benue State and, the adjoining states down to Kogi State. So, Mr. President, the development challenges are very enormous. But beyond that also, where there are good developments, it will offer us an opportunity to exploit the natural resources that is so abundant in the North Central zone. And that is why this bill is very important. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, to be read the second time, and to actually pass.
The minority whip.
Mr. President, spoken very eloquently about the need for us to have a development commission in the North Central. Mr. President, this is long overdue and the issues cannot be overemphasized because the North Central is the bridge builder through which you pass through and traverse Nigeria from the north, the south, the west. Mr. President, he even gave examples of the bad roads in the North Central because you come through the North Central to the southeast, you come through the North Central to the northwest and to the northeast. Mr. President, if you look at the FCT, you will find out that, just like he has said, that so many things and so many infrastructural development projects and needs for the North Central are overstretched. And as such, Mr. President, the need for this development commission to cater for the needs of this zone and ensure development of this zone. So, Mr. President, without wasting too much time and talking too much, I'd like to urge my distinguished colleagues to support this bill to go for the second reading so that we can have a sense of belonging and have a development commission that will take care of the North Central, because indeed the North Central is home to every Nigerian. With these few remarks, I'd like to thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Adigyan.
Also, of this bill for the North Central Development Commission. Mr. President, this bill is a developmental bill. And the North Central geopolitical region largely consists of what is historically and often preferably referred to as the Middle Belt region of Nigeria. The states of Kwara, Niger, Kogi, Benue, Nasarawa, and Plateau. This is the region that has the highest conglomerate of ethnic minorities in Nigeria. Mr. President, it is the most agriculturally viable region of this country with very clement weather. And it has massive water resources. Mr. President, this region houses the highest concentration of solid minerals in Nigeria. And this is the region, so unfortunately, that has the least presence of government attention and presence.
Let me remind you that we have included FCT in the North Central, and if you are saying there is no presence of government, this is the seat of government. Even the president is in Abuja. So I just want to remind you about that.
Mr. President, the FCT is for all of Nigeria. We are housing.
Okay, the Sokush Adigyan, I will ask the minority whip whether he wants to stay with North Central Development Commission or also have his own commission. If you are saying FCT is for all Nigerians, it's true. But Senator Philo Aduda, do you want to stay with North Central Development Commission? Okay, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. The challenges of the North Central have been highlighted by earlier speakers, my colleagues from the zone. And Mr. President, you will recall that as a result of the peculiar security challenges in this country, in the 8th Assembly, when the Northeast Development Commission was in the making, Kano State and Plateau State were to be included in the Northeast Development Commission, and the Senate took that decision. I was in the House of Reps then. But when it reached somewhere, the states of Kano and Plateau State were no longer in the commission then. And the advice was that the North Central geopolitical region can, in view of its own peculiar challenges, come up with its own bill. And that's why we are on the floor today, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I would say that outside of the Northeast region, no other region has been so devastated and traumatized than the North Central region. It's unfortunate that today the Northwest is equally facing what we had thought was just limited to the Northeast and North Central. And as a result of these challenges, Mr. President, the region feels neglected. There is that perception of desertion by successive governments in Nigeria. If you look at the budgets of this country and you look at interventions in critical infrastructure, if you look at these states that I've mentioned, you will see that what is happening in other regions is yet to be visited positively on the North Central geopolitical region. And that is why we are making a case very strongly for this Development Commission so that we can tackle and give attention to agriculture and agriculture-allied industries in this region. As I've said, it is the most agriculturally viable region of the country. So this commission will enable government and, of course, states of the region and the people to concentrate in the development of agriculture and agri-allied industries. And, of course, the mining industry will receive special attention under this commission, in addition to the provision of critical infrastructure, particularly the need for us to have a railroad that will take off from Jos, hit Abuja, and proceed to Minna. A railroad that will link up this region. And that is going to help a lot because all the railroads in this country are from south to north. There is none that links up this central region of the country. And we are saying that is very, very important. And Mr. President, distinguished colleagues,
you can round up now.
This commission will undertake the rebuilding, reconstruction and reintegration of displaced communities that pervade almost all the states in the region. And that is why a special fund that will be managed by the commission, with the federal government being a contributor, with the states, and of course, having development partners and donors that will come into it. Finally, Mr. President, a stable and peaceful North Central geopolitical region is in the best interest of this country. This commission is therefore will heal the perception, erase the perception of marginalization, and bring the presence of government to this region. We therefore urge all colleagues to all support this bill for the establishment of the North Central Geopolitical Development Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Yakubu Oseni.
It is very important among all the development commission that has been presented in this floor. I think this is one of the most important bill. Kogi's North Central is a nerve of this nation. When we are to talk of human capital development, you meet it in North Central. Agriculture, solid mineral, and North Central people are miners of repute. And if at all we are now set as a nation to industrialize, I think the base of Nigeria's industrialization lies in North Central. Yes. And when we are to talk of economic diversification that we are all clamoring for today, we will talk of solid mineral and that of agriculture and power. Those three I mentioned lies majorly in North Central. And if that is the case, it means that this commission is well deserved. And I urge distinguished colleagues to throw our support to make sure that this bill pass through the second reading. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Ibrahim Loro.
Nigeria in general, but in particular, to be able to identify the peculiarity and the peculiar circumstances, situations, and needs of different components or different parts of Nigeria that make the whole. And as is often said, your weakest part is your strength. It means to be able to make Nigeria as a whole strong, viable, and better developed. We have to develop the constituent part. It is in this regard that I rise to support this bill. Just like we have already discussed the other zonal commissions, the North Central Zone, as highlighted by previous speakers, has its own peculiarity in terms of development challenges. Some of them were highlighted in the late debate. Based on its location, based on its geographical location, it is endowed with water, which leads to flooding, and this destroys farmlands, it destroys livelihood, and so on. And except it is addressed, the gain that ought to come from that will not come. And the national kind of development or the way we allocate resources does not address some of these challenges. In addition to that, like many parts of Nigeria also, we have high level of poverty, despite the availability of natural resources. And this kind of commission now will look at how to harness these resources that are available. This has been mentioned by earlier speakers. North Central Zone has agricultural viable lands, it has water resources, it has mineral resources. And I think it does have some level of human capital. But there are parts of it, particularly the hard part, like the state where I come from, our northern part, the level of literacy there is very high. There are no roads. Where my distinguished colleague, Senator Sadiq, comes from, to be able to get to his constituency, we have to pass through your state. There's no direct road within the same state, and you have to travel like for 10 hours, and it's still the same state. This is because of lack of development. This is also happening in Niger State.
Please round up.
That I rise to support that we need this commission to be able to harness the peculiarity of North Central, and in doing that, Nigeria will be better for it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Olubimi Adetumbi. I thought you raised your hand. Okay, Senator Opeyemi.
Not only because I believe every geopolitical zone should be given an opportunity to further develop, but because it is important to emphasize, Mr. President, that there are two reasons why development commissions are necessary. And people seem to be soaked in one of the two reasons. And that's why when they talk about development commission in some other zones, they are a bit agitated. One of the reasons is to take care of peculiar crises as a way of trying to rehabilitate. And I think that is the situation with the Niger Delta Development Commission as well as the Northeast Development Commission. The other reason, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, why development commissions are established is to deliberately take a step to develop by having a commission that will be focused on the peculiarities of a region, that will be focused on the strengths, the economic strengths of a region. And I think that is the next level of development that we need in this country. The whole essence of geopolitical zone, Mr. President, is about power sharing. It's about sharing of our resources so that there's a platform for every region to agitate. But we need to go beyond that to begin to talk about geo-economic zones in this country, which is what will bring about the real development that we are talking about. If you go to China today, Mr. President,
I don't think there's anybody who would like to go to China.
then if you went to China 3 months ago and you wanted to buy building material, you'll be directed to a particular section of the country. If you ask them, after buying your building materials, that you wanted agriculture, farming equipment, you'll be directed to another part of the country. You might have to travel some 200 or 300 kilometers away to be able to buy those things. In other words, every part of the country, based on the kind of natural resources that exist there and the allied industries, related allied industries that will grow from such natural resources, every particular region is specializing in something. And that way, there is even development in the country. And I believe that is the next thing we have to be talking about, geo-economic zone. And that is why I support the establishment of these various development commissions. So that, the Southeast Development Commission that we just passed, we know that in the area of science and technology, or if there will ever be technological breakthrough in this country, we know where to go. We know what they are going to concentrate on. If you are talking about commerce and industry, we know, the area to concentrate. We're talking about agriculture and the agro-allied industries that will flow from that. We know the section of the country. So, for this reason, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I want to say that I also believe and advocate very strongly that the North Central Development Commission be supported. I so move.
State, no local government, no zone in this country that is not endowed by one natural resource or the other. So when we have these kind of requests from the Senate, it simply speaks to the need for us to expand the commercial base, this industrial base of this country. For example, I'm aware, as we speak today, there's a lot of business that's going on between Kano and Ibadan in the area of fabrics. So when we encourage the zones or the state to take advantage of the resources they have and develop it and use it to target their peculiar economic needs, we're not just doing it for that zone. I believe we are doing it for the entire country. When a section of this country is faced with security challenges, for example, we all feel the pains as patriotic Nigerians. So when a section also is developed economically, there is no way that the benefits of that development accruable to the zone will be taken by just the people of that zone alone. They will create jobs, they will create wealth, and people from other zones will also benefit from it. And besides, it will also create room for competitiveness among the states of the Federation. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'm supporting this bill not because it's for North Central, or because there was another one from Southeast, or because the other day we also debated one from Southwest. I'm supporting it because it is good for this country. Mr. President, I still support.
I will put the question now. Those in favor that this bill be a bill for an act to establish the North Central Development Commission in the act as a catalyst to develop the agricultural, commercial, and industrial potentials of the North Central, to receive and manage funds from allocation of the Federation for the agriculture and industrial development of the North Central and other development challenges and for other connected matters 2020 second reading taken. And the bill is referred to the Senate Committee on Establishment and Public Service Matters to report back within 4 weeks. Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues. By way of some comments, let me say that I think what we have all agreed is each geopolitical zone should have a development commission. But in my view, what Nigeria needs most will be proper planning. Because all this China example that one of our colleagues gave us is not based on commission. It's based on national planning that is followed through. Here, close to home, at the risk of saying something controversial or debatable, Lagos State is setting the pace in many aspects as a state compared to most of our states. They have been able to, through a well-grounded blueprint, they are making progress faster than I think most of the states. I think we need to emphasize our national planning more, because this is the only way we can address all the development challenges in different parts of the country. We have some advantages in some areas, and of course some states or geopolitical zones have comparative advantage in some areas, and these are where we are supposed to focus for the development of the country through investments in those areas that we find in some of the geopolitical zones. I think every geopolitical zone has something to contribute. But you see, when we are just looking at the commissions, one of our colleagues in his contribution said the North Central is so marginalized. There's no federal presence. And this is where the president of the country is resident. And all of us are here, so I can't see marginalization here. Definitely what we need is to work to ensure that we exploit and utilize the potentials of the North Central, and there are a lot of potentials everywhere in all the parts of the country. So with this, I think the Senate should continue to focus on national planning. We have a chairman, our chairman National Planning Committee himself is almost a professor of this, and I believe that we should be working with the executive arm of government. We should insist that national planning should be resuscitated, because it appears like we do our budgets for 12 calendar months, and then the next year we do the same, each in isolation, each in a silo of its own. And that's not helping us. So I believe that in addition to having commissions, we need to have proper national planning. That could be long term. Thank you very much for this. Leader of the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues.